From the Virginia Audio Collective at WTJU 91.1 FM and Brown College at the University of Virginia, this is Circle of Willis, human stories of the science that shapes our world.
If you have a so-called job that you learn in 5 minutes and you have to do it for 20 years, you go crazy. You know, many of these jobs you really can only do if you're stoned. We need jobs that are demanding enough so that they can't be done under intoxication.
Yeah. Welcome back to Circle of Willis. I'm your host, Jim Cohn.
And I'm the trusty producer, Sage Tangway.
And that was the voice of our guest, Peter Sterling, neuroscientist and swell guy at the University of Pennsylvania. Last episode, we learned about allostasis and how the body actually changes a lot of little things, temperature, blood pressure, waste processing, in order to stay stable within different scenarios or environments. If you haven't already heard that episode, please stop here and go back and check that one out first.
We left off just as Jim and Peter were starting to broach some of the larger personal and societal implications of this science, particularly dopamine and how we get it. Now, dopamine is one of the more commonly known neurotransmitters. As someone who is not a biologist or a neuroscientist, I mostly hear people reference dopamine as something that helps us be happy. But clearly it does a lot more than that. Maybe I'm opening a can of bilateral worms here, but could you tell us a little bit more about dopamine?
Yeah, well, dopamine is part of one of the oldest strategies in terrestrial biology. It's really about learning. It's about tagging things that are important in the environment that you want, and then using those tags to find it again. And it's really that simple. It turns out, one, that it feels kind of nice to find a thing that you want. Therefore, you seek that thing again because it feels nice again and you want to feel nice. Now, that's an anthropomorphized way to understand those bilateral worms. But the point is that dopamine is a method of sensitizing your brain to stimuli that you need to survive.
Gotcha.
And if that's very abstract, that's because that's covering a lot of ground.
Right.
That can be a lot of different things to a lot of different kinds of animals. Ultimately, at the same time, it's sort of the same thing to all of those animals.
Right.
One of the ways to understand dopamine and its role in learning is that its release is stimulated by unpredicted positive things, by surprises that are like happy surprises.
If surprises are what give us the good stuff, this leads us to a very important question that you asked Peter. Let's take a listen.
Why do we try so hard to make life easier, to surround ourselves with creature comforts? I mean, if hearing you talk, I'm thinking about electric blankets.
Yeah.
Right? I put on an electric blanket, turn on the electric little knob,
right.
And all of a sudden there's no weather.
Yeah. Right.
I am fine, perfect, whatever it is.
Well, no, you're not.
Okay.
And so here, another literary reference that I like and have re-quoted many times is from Herman Melville's Moby Dick. There's a beginning, early chapter in which...
Quick.
Yeah, in which Ishmael, who's the main character, is sharing a room with this South Polynesian character, Queequeg, and it's cold. They're in Nantucket, and it's December, and it's cold as hell, and they're in this room, and they're very cold. But there's a fire in the room, and so there's one spot on their nose that stays warm. So Melville says through his character that a fire, if you have a fire in your sleeping quarters that can keep the room warm, he says this is for rich people, but it's really it's a disaster. A rich person can never really feel warm because to feel real warmth, some part of you has to be cold. The tip of your nose or your forehead or something has to be cold. So it's by contrast that we have these things. So the problem is that all of these creature comforts that we have, we never wonder where we're going to get dinner. We just go to the supermarket and pick it off the shelves. Or we don't wonder where will we find a dry cave or where will we find a warm fire. We know. We come in, we switch on the thermostat, or it's automatically switched on now. We're rarely uncomfortable, rarely in doubt if we have sufficient money where we're going to find food. And so why does this leave us unhappy? Why are we unhappy in the face of all of this comfort? And that is I think a very important question. So my answer is that the nerve cells that release dopamine are part of a circuit that releases dopamine when they encounter a surprise, a positive, unpredicted surprise, reward prediction error. The same neurons, when we encounter something that is predicted, don't fire. So they're looking for surprise. They're not looking for comfort that is expected. In former days, when we lived without supermarkets, without central heating, without cars to drive us everywhere, we had to make a lot of effort for things. And so when we encountered something good, something to reduce our effort, something to reduce our discomfort, to reduce our hunger, and these were big deals. And that's what gave us a lot of pleasure. Now we have all this convenience, but the convenience does not supply the signal, the dopamine signal that we need. And we it doesn't have to be huge. It has to come sort of randomly multiple times a day. We can store fat, we can store energy, we can store heat, but we can't store this signal because it's meant to be an intermittent pulse. Okay, so we get a pulse of satisfaction, but soon we're not satisfied. And then we get another pulse. And you just need a few during the day to keep you going. And Kat asked me the other night, what is boredom? And I've been thinking about that. And I think maybe an answer is that it's moments in which we really are between pulses. And that's what makes us restless. And when we say, oh, I'm bored, it's because we're not engaged in something that has the potential to give us a little hit, of dopamine. So what happens when we are completely comfortable, where we're searching for a hit, but everything is predicted, and so we're not getting our little pulse of dopamine. So what do? Well, we have to find something that is unpredicted, that is positive. So we eat some food. Well, the food is not surprise. You just pick it up off the store, out of the store, or anywhere else. The surprise then can be if it's sweeter or fattier and richer. Okay, and so so we get a little hit of dopamine from a McDonald's. It's a very popular thing to do. Go to McDonald's, and so that's fine. You start out and you have a Mac, but then you expect it. If you go into McDonald's, you expect, and you get this Mac. Well, that's predicted. It's not that big, not much fun. You don't get that much dopamine. So you go to a Big Mac.
Yeah, right.
Right. And then pretty soon, you go to the Big Mac, and then that's predicted. And so what do you got? You got a Whopper. Okay. And I think that can stand. We could go on, and most of American food industry is based on this concept of appealing to people's sense of everything is predicted by coming up with some big new whopping surprise, and it's richer and richer, and that's why the country is getting fatter and fatter.
It seems like there are a couple of possibilities, really. One is that everything's predictable and we're not getting our pulses of dopamine that way. Another is everything is too hard and I can't, no matter how much I try to get the ordinary pulse, I can't satisfy it. This is maybe people living in poverty. So one of the things that hearing you talk, I'm trying to reconcile, hardship
Yes.
with boredom,
Right.
because, both require these pulses,
Right.
right? But neither of them are getting them.
Right. Right.
In either case, it seems
Right.
like the Whopper is going to be helpful.
But it's only temporarily helpful. The Whopper and rich food gives you these big surges of dopamine, okay? Drugs do the same thing. In fact, you can show that the response to food and heroin and cocaine has the same sort of time course. We are looking for a hit and we can't of dopamine and we're not getting it. One of the things we can do is to there's a whole variety of drugs that actually act directly on the dopamine system to release large quantities of dopamine. So alcohol releases dopamine, cigarettes and nicotine releases dopamine, cocaine and heroin by various circuits do something similar, and they all act to raise the level of dopamine in our certain regions of the brain. And that is very effective for raising your mood and making you feel, you get a big surge of dopamine, and it can be provide a lot of pleasure and satisfaction and so on. But then the brain adapts to it, and so it turns down its circuit, and then you need more.
You met my grad student Marlene. She did a study looking at individuals who grew up in these sort of low-income areas around Charlottesville. Often, much of the sample is African-American, low-income. So adding stress to stress. And she found that, on the one hand, they showed greater responsiveness to a monetary incentive cue, where it showed them they would won some money in the nucleus accumbens. So, where you've got a lot of dopaminergic activity learning. Not surprisingly, along with more activation in response to those than people who were from higher SES, they had larger nucleus structurally. They had more gray matter in their nucleus accumbens. So one of the things that I think of allostasis applied here on different time scales.
Sure.
Like building the muscle, like you were saying earlier. Yeah. There's a sense in which people who, we need to reproduce the study. We need to, it's preliminary, but it looks like maybe people from hardship in their childhoods are more sensitive to potential rewards. And I don't know what kind of consequences that would be, but it all goes back to that again.
Sure. Well, one thing for sure is that all of the brain is responsive to exercise, just the way muscle is. You use it, and things grow. I mean, if a violinist who practices, many hours a day, the areas of their brain that controls their fingering enlarges. And this same thing is true for taxi drivers in London who have to memorize the whole street map of London. The area of their brain enlarges too, and at the expense of other areas that have to shrink because the skull is full. And then when they retire and they're no longer exercising that map, running that map, it goes back to where it was. And their old other parts of the brain that had shrunk down grow back, and they regain certain skills. So there is a trade-off here, again, in the brain.
Light question now. How do we restructure society to give us all the optimal frequency and amount of dopaminergic pulses?
I could take a crack at that. I mean, it's a very big question, of course. Well, I think from first principles, what you need are activities that contain a lot of unpredicted positive elements. So schooling for children should not be sitting 35 kids in a classroom looking straight ahead at the teacher. They should be all arranged to be exploring.
Yeah.
And the things, because dopamine is our reward when we get something unpredicted, we tend to practice the things we're good at because that gives us a little edge. So if we're pretty good at learning music, we get rewarded. Our brain is rewarded for that. So we practice. So I think that one thing is that children have to be allowed to find the things they're best at and to practice them, because that is going to be the most rewarding thing for them. And that's the way our earlier societies did so well, because we had, a hunter, a healer, a navigator, a musician, and an artist, and so on. So that I think is a core thing that would help a lot. And then beyond childhood, we need activities that we can continue to grow and improve on. And that's why artists and writers and musicians, I think, they can keep working, and scientists keep working at your craft, making it a little better, keep learning stuff. And what we know about hunter-gatherers is that when they're children and adolescents, they don't do anything. When they get to be about 20, they join the adult hunters and gatherers, and they begin to learn their trade. And you would think, well, you go out into the wilderness and you just pick up stuff and you shoot an animal or something. There's nothing to it. But in fact, their productivity increases or grows over 25 years, from 20 to 45. And so that makes you realize that hunting and gathering is really a career.
Yeah.
And so, and then once you've learned your career, when you're up, they're like 50, you can keep going for a long time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go away. But the point is that those 25 years, you're not just stamping a paper or scanning a barcode. If you have a so-called job that you learn in 5 minutes and you have to do it for 20 years, you go crazy. Many of these jobs you really can only do if you're stoned. And so that, I think, is we need jobs that are demanding enough so that they can't be done under intoxication.
Yeah. There's so many intersecting elements here. The Big Mac is cheap and easy. You don't have to make it. So it's predictable in that sense. It provides a nice fat, literally, dose of sugar and salt and fat for you to have, a bonanza on that front. It doesn't contain a lot of nutrition otherwise. So, you might feel like you continually need to eat more stuff. So maybe another Big Mac. We don't have time. We don't have time in our typical lives. Certainly if I'm working all day at one job and then having a second job in the evening, I might only have time to eat a Big Mac while I'm racing from one job to the other. If you're going to cook a meal, a nutritious meal, you need to get the stuff, prepare the stuff, make the meal. It can take hours, and we don't have that kind of life.
Well, we should. I mean, we should have time for those things, and where we evolved as foragers in small communities, there was quite a lot of free time, and for hanging around the fire, telling stories. We know that early cultures, practically the first thing that humans did as they migrated is they found a cave, and the first thing they did when they moved into a cave was paint it. There are these cave paintings all over the world.
Yeah.
The famous ones are in France, these Lascaux caves. They're 11,000 years ago, but the ones in Indonesia that have been found are from 43,000 years ago.
40,000 years ago.
So that was very shortly after we left Africa. This is this group of caves in southern Argentina called Las Cuevas de los Manos, which is on the cover of my book.
Yes.
And what you see, those were from 11,000 years ago. And so it's very clear that the first indigenous people that came down across the Bering Land Bridge, down North America, down across the Panamanian Isthmus to the tip of southern Argentina, they got there and said, let's paint. That's what they did. And I think of these, if you see graffiti in subway tunnels and so on, they're often these hands.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a sort of a Jungian archetype somehow that human beings, when they see a tunnel or cave, they paint hands.
In my Why We Hold Hands class,
Yes.
all my students make handprints.
Oh, good.
And they
Oh, good.
decorate them, and
Good.
then we superimpose them at the end over the cave in
Yeah.
Argentina.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Oh, really?
Just to drive home.
Yeah.
This is they're not doing
Yeah.
something new or weird.
That's
This has
right.
been
That's
going
right.
on for.
That's right. And I think another thing to point out is if you look at these paintings, the Argentinian ones and the Indonesian ones, you can in the Indonesian cave paintings of the animals, you can recognize the animals today. They still exist.
Yes.
So these paintings, if you see these newspaper cartoons, of some caveman with a skin on and a big club, looking stupid, and making a stick drawing, of a character on the wall. That isn't. These are high quality
Oh, my
things,
God.
and obviously, it wasn't just anybody in the community. There must have been people with special skill who were doing this. And to do it, of course, they couldn't go buy pigment down at the store. They had to find ochre, it was a mineral, and they grind it up, and then they had to get little bones, probably hollow bones of birds. And the way they did these, as you of course know, is to put their hand on the wall and blow this ochre between them. It was sort of like a stencil. And this is a very high level of skill. And if you think about it, you realize, well, whoever was doing this, men or women, we don't know, and spending time preparing the materials, gaining the skills, making the paintings, somebody was feeding them. And because they weren't out hunting and gathering, they were doing this decoration. And what it means is, I think of it as the equivalent of the National Endowment for the Arts. I mean, there was some community support for these kinds of activities. Then the question is, well, why, since we evolved to have efficient bodies and efficient brains, why did our brain invest in these sorts of skills? I mean, we have, for music, this is the same thing. We have parts of our brain that are devoted to skillful painting, skillful music, skillful storytelling, skillful all kinds of manner of the arts. To have invested so much brain in these artistic activities means that it must be very fundamental to our survival as a species.
Yeah.
And so what is the role? And I include in this what I call sacred practice, which isn't just about going to church. It's about a sort of activities that have an emotional content and a spiritual content that draws us together. I think all of these activities draw together members of a community and relieve the sorts of tensions that would naturally arise when people are living close together who have big brains and are smart.
Yeah.
And can cause all kinds of mischief. So I see these artistic activities and what I would call sacred practices, which include fairly elaborate sex too. I mean, if you watch animals, they don't, when they copulate, it's like a pretty brief thing, and they walk off and shrug their shoulders.
Yeah, it's not exactly the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, exactly,
Right,
exactly.
yeah.
So we've invested a great deal of effort and imagination and time in these activities.
One of my favorite things about those Indonesian paintings, I mean, some people think that one of them in Indonesia, in Borneo, might be the oldest so far recorded or known drawings of human figures.
Uh-huh.
And what are those human figures doing? They're dancing. They're very obviously dancing.
Right.
They're holding hands and
Right.
dancing, and they have these big, elaborate headdresses on.
Right.
These are not just human figures for some kind of, I don't know,
Art class.
Yeah, they are doing a thing,
Right.
and it's an important thing, and they look like you can just, honest to God, I look at them, and the art is stylized.
Right.
It's interesting.
Right.
It's important. I think Picasso said in seeing something like this, oh my God, they were doing it way before me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And they look joyful.
Right. Exactly. So there's this whole variety of activities that our brain invests in because it relieves the tensions, it raises the spirits, and it holds people together and allows them to cooperate. And it's the cooperation in the long run that the species benefits from.
I think it's no coincidence that you have this interest not only in sort of how we work, but in prescribing a way for society to be. And it reminds me of how you have been active in trying to shape society to be more just and more enjoyable. They're
Right.
two sides of the same coin, right?
Right.
For most of or all of your life.
Right.
Why is that?
Yeah.
Small
Sure,
question. Another
sure.
small question.
Yeah,
I specialize.
Yeah, well, I would, before I go to that all the way back, I would say that my interest in simpler societies, smaller communities, which really are restricted to indigenous groups in various parts of the world, I was drawn to reading about them and to visiting them because I was dissatisfied with my own life. It seemed too isolating and constricted, and I was attracted at that time. This is in my mid-30s, early mid-30s, by reading a quotation of Karl Marx, who said in 1844, when he was 25 or something, he said, when we get to the stage of a final stage of communism where all human antagonisms have gone away and we can sort of enjoy our life, he said, I will hunt in the morning and I will fish in the afternoon and I will write criticism in the evening. And I'll never have to be a fisherman, a hunter, or a writer. I can just do all of these things as I want. And this, when I was a young assistant professor struggling, I thought, just sounds wonderful, And there's a wonderful book, actually, an early anthropology book from the 70s by a woman named Janet Siskind, called To Hunt in the Morning. And it was founded
a reference
on this.
to...
Yes, and so she goes off to visit and live with the Sharanahua Indians in the Peruvian Amazon. And she says, a romance of anthropology is to project your unmet needs onto another culture, And so when she was there, she was realizing, she needed the experience of being able to eat the food that she gathered, to wear the clothes that she made, to live in proximity to the natural world. And this is what she was missing in her life and needed it. She also realized that those people, the people she was visiting, and had also unmet needs that they projected onto her, like convenient stuff. You got a flashlight there, you got a, you have some mod con, and they were very attracted to those. So one wants to keep a balance. We're always looking to the other for what they have that we're missing. And I during my life, have missed this sort of hunt in the morning stuff. And now in retirement, I live on a farm in the mountains of western Panama. And to be honest, at this point, we have electricity and we actually have internet. It wasn't very good when we started, but it's pretty good now. But I do still have some of the experience of growing, eating what I grow, and doing some physical labor on the farm. And I'm able to write as well. I don't hunt, but I do eat my neighbor's chicken. We have chickens, free-range chickens on the farm, and so on. So
gather their eggs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I did have a good experience when I was in high school, working on a small farm in the summers in the Hudson Valley, and I enjoyed that sensory richness of aromas and tastes and textures and physical activity and so on. Agricultural life has an appeal. If you do it for a living, it's very hard, So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is hunting in the morning and writing criticism at night scalable to 8 billion people?
Okay, so that's a very good question. First, I would say the romance, Marx's romance and Jan Siskin's romance, has a very clear limit. When I get my cataracts replaced, I want an ophthalmic surgeon who does it all day,
Yeah.
every day,
Right.
and 30 a day. And if I get my coronary bypass fixed, I'd want it from a heart surgeon who was pretty familiar with it. It wasn't hacking or messing around writing novels,
Right. Right.
So I think there are certain situations where you do need people with expertise, which requires constant practice. If you go to a symphony, you don't want to hear a violinist who only practices an hour a day.
Yeah.
So there is that on a technical expertise that we need to build this complicated society. But in the U.S. we forget that other places, they live, a more balanced life. My friends in Europe, they take time off. For example, in the U.S. there is no law in the U.S. that requires companies to give people a paid vacation. And the consequence is a whole quarter of our workforce that has no paid vacation. They have no rest. And many of them have to have 2 jobs, and they're raising kids, and they have no...
And they're worried about what happens if they get sick.
Yeah, exactly. But in Europe, there is paid health care. Most countries in Europe have a requirement for like a month's paid vacation, sometimes more. And not only that, they require that some of the vacation be taken during the summer months when the schools are closed, so there can be a family vacation.
When I lived in the Netherlands with 2 small children, aged 1 and 3, my wife and I were on our bicycles taking the kids. We took them to schools. We took them to daycares.
Yep.
But to do so, we had to travel by bicycle in the cold, often in the cold rain, 20 miles every day.
Wow.
That was the total riding,
Yeah.
right? So it was about 5 miles one way to drop them off, and then you'd have to go get them again in the afternoon. And I thought, how am I going to survive this? Mm-hmm. But here's the thing, I did survive this. Mm-hmm. And not only that, I'd listen to music, or it's beautiful views, and it was all on these bicycle paths that kept me far away from the dangers of automobiles and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
When we came back, we felt kind of like superheroes for a while. Mm-hmm. Like the cold didn't bother me as much.
Right.
Being out and doing things, the things that I now regard again as inconveniences didn't seem so inconvenient.
Right.
What I noticed about the kids similarly was that being outside and having the weather and seeing stuff go by and birds and swans and all, it was stimulating.
Yeah, sure.
It wasn't boring.
Right.
Maybe I'm hopelessly naive, but it seems like it just might be possible to construct a life for most people that wasn't desperately boring all the time.
Right. Well, I think that's what people have in Europe,
Yeah.
And, much closer to a reasonable life. And this, if they can do it, we certainly can. So I was born in 1940. My parents met during the 1930s, during the Depression. They worked on the Federal Writers Project, which was a federally funded project by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to try to bring people out of the Depression. And he was sort of trying to, if you'll pardon me, build back better. And it was very effective, really, in many ways. But at that time, many people in the U.S. were working people were members of the Communist Party. And I know that today everybody associates the Communist Party in their mind with the Soviet Union or Russia within the Soviet Union. And it's true that that was sort of a model. The idea was that they had made a revolution in 1917 to create socialism, communism, and it was sort of a model. Well, we could do that here, and so on. And that was one side of it that has been publicized and attacked by the right to criticize it. But most of the communists that were my parents' friends and companions, and who I grew up with, their main concern was to improve social conditions in the U.S. And so they were organizing labor unions. And in the 1930s, the big car manufacturers, Ford and Chrysler and so on, the working conditions were terrible. They were overworked, they were underpaid, they were dangerous. And this is true in the coal mines and the steel mills and so on. And the longshoremen workers, longshoremen then were unloading. There weren't these containers that were unloaded by derricks. They were longshoremen went into a boat in San Francisco and carried out sack by sack and whatnot the goods. And so there was a big resistance among the owners of industry to workers' rights. There were long hours. There were no vacations. There was no sick pay. All kinds of things.
Kids were working.
Yeah, child labor, and so unions began to organize to fight this. And in the 30s, there was a group of unions who were doing the hardest, most difficult jobs. The assembly lines, the steel mills, the longshoremen, and so on. They were organized to a large degree by members of the Communist Party. And the Communist Party at that stage was a political party. It ran candidates for public office. Some of them were elected to Congress and city councils all over the country. They ran candidates for president. In the late 30s, they might have gotten 100,000 votes or something like that for president. Not enough to become president, but it was a significant political movement. And my parents were members, and they remained members up into the early 1950s. And finally, they left the party. Many people left the party in 1956 when the Soviet Union marched into Hungary with troops and put down the Hungarian democracy. And then later that year, the premier of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev, acknowledged that in public that Stalin had been really a bad guy. I mean, a really terrible guy, and it killed
tens of millions.
Well, millions maybe. The World War II cost the Soviet Union about 20 million people, I think, and that wasn't just Stalin. That was Hitler, but my parents and their friends were preoccupied with social justice, including a major effort of the Communist Party was to stop lynching. Black people were just pretty casually lynched. Hundreds of people, black men a year in the South were lynched. In the North, black people, couldn't find places to live. They worked in jobs that were restricted to menial sort of labor, nothing above, the sleeping car porter or the street cleaner or stuff like that, and no skilled jobs. They were excluded. So my parents were concerned with improving unions and improving the living conditions for African Americans. So that was the family I was born into, my sister and I. My sister is 4 years younger. And so we were raised in this tradition of social concern. And my mother used to quote to me, the idea was that we got from Marx was and remains the idea not simply do unto others as you would have them do unto you, not don't do unto others what you would not have done unto you. It's not just the golden rule. It's really a one moral notch, I think, above that, which is from each according to his ability, what you have naturally the ability to do, both from what's within you and to what you've been given and been able to make for it, you should give to those who have need and perhaps less ability. And I think that I'm very satisfied with that. That was 1848. I find that a pretty satisfying precept to live by. You know? And people say, well, why are you doing that? Why are you bothering with that? I can. I do it because I can. I'm able. You know.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky to have some ability and some support, so I try to do it.
Well, I thank you for the work that you're doing, for the work you've done, and for talking to me right now.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a very nice week for me. Thanks.
All right.
And I am young enough to understand and gradually forget.
So there's a lot going on here. First, I want to talk a little bit more about dopamine. I don't know. Have you heard of this? This is kind of a trend where people will go on dopamine fasts. That's what they call it, at least.
Yeah. This is the thing where you don't look at your phone for 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah, it's not so much of a fast. They're just resensitizing their brains to all of the excess stimuli that we have now that we have this fun box that gives us pleasure all the time.
Yeah, this fun box that's not actually that fun, because the thing that's about the phone is that the bursts of dopamine are very, very tiny.
Right.
And one of the weird things about dopamine and reinforcement, what Peter's talking about braids together with the science of behavior, behaviorism, and reinforcers. The reinforcer is the behavioral version of dopamine, right? It's anything that makes a certain behavior increase.
Right.
And one of the things that we've learned about reinforcers, and this is tied to your dopamine response, is that smaller ones get you more addicted.
Oh, okay.
So
interesting.
So one of the most insidious things that's ever happened to the human race is the like button.
Yeah.
Because you get a little boink, boink, boink. And the thing is about that is that it's relatively unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to happen. It's really tiny. So it's not enough to nourish you. Right? But it's enough to give you a sense that nourishment might be attainable if you keep following it.
Oh my gosh.
So
this explains my entire relationship with TikTok.
All of us, right? And TikTok is the worst because it's actually better because it's kind of funny. You see the cat
there's a lot you
flying
actually
through
get
the air or whatever and attacking the yarn ball. And you're like, I want another one of those.
Yeah. It becomes the yarn ball and I'm the cat.
Yeah. So there are studies of dopamine in mice where you give them the mouse the ability to cause a dopamine release in their brain by pressing a lever. And that mouse will press the lever until they die. They will not do anything other than press the lever anymore.
That's kind of sad.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way with my phone sometimes. And, I realize that I've been overstimulated at the point where I open and close an application twice. And then I go to a different thing. And then I'm like, no. And then I look around me and I think about other things that I could be doing. And the answer is no. None of those things are going to get me what I need. And then I'm like, oh, I've completely desensitized myself to this response, at least for right now. That's what it feels like, at least.
Well, one of the most successful forms of psychotherapeutic intervention for feeling down is something called behavioral activation. And it works like this. You predict that going out into the world is not going to be very fun, and you're not going to get your dopamine pulse. So you just stay at home. It turns out that we're bad at predicting those things. So if you get people to just go out anyway, you tend to have unpredictable positive surprises.
Right.
And it's the unpredictability part that makes us kind of go, well, that sounds like a lot of work. And one of the other
Yeah.
things that we're designed for, as Peter explained, is efficiency. And so if you don't think that you're going to get the thing, then the wisest course of action is to not do the work,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But we've structured our lives somehow such that we've been able to persuade ourselves that we're not going to get the thing that we will in fact get if we go out.
Right.
So we wound up just staying home, trying to conserve energy that we don't need to conserve.
That's really interesting. When we're talking about allostasis and the predictive shifts in our body, we're not talking about things that we predict mentally.
No.
But it seems like this kind of translates to that. Your expectations are what's going to get you in trouble, whether good or bad, you know? Like if I go somewhere thinking, oh, this is going to be the greatest, you know, it's never as good as what I thought it was going to be. What you were just suggesting, if I'm like, oh, I don't really want to go, and then I do go somewhere, yeah, I do find that there's like a surprise happiness that comes through that.
Yeah. One of my colleagues at the University of Virginia in the psychology department, this guy named Tim Wilson, has done some work showing that we are particularly bad at predicting how we're going to feel emotionally about a thing.
Oh, man.
We're terrible at that.
Yeah.
And this has real implications for all the stuff that Peter's talking about.
Right.
And for our, behavioral activation, our psychological health. The question that I asked early on in part 2 of the interview about things being maybe too comfortable.
Yeah.
And we sort of forget. We've removed the weather from our lives. On the one hand, that can, in fact, make us more comfortable. But on the other hand, it removes the frequency of these positive surprises from our lives. And what we had in the old days, you might say, in really old days, was a lot of little like, oh, look, a berry.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was going to be there. That's awesome.
Right.
And then you sort of wander around.
Yeah, all of this has made me think a lot about like the Back to the Land movement, where I most recently lived in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. There was a big Back to the Land movement there in the 1970s, where a bunch of people from cities all over the country said, I'm done. I'm done living here and working whatever desk job I'm working. I am going to go subsistence farm and just kind of live off the land as much as possible. And I think that's happening a little bit now again, especially in the wake of the pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot of people have said, you know what? I am entirely too stressed out for the possibility that my mortality is just like right around the corner. And I don't want to be around tons and tons of people anymore. I don't want to be just in society. I want to go be more in touch with nature.
Yeah.
Not everyone can do that. But I think what is interesting of that type of living, or the skill set that you have to develop in that, yeah, it's a lot of hard work, and a lot of older people are like, why would you ever want to, you could do anything, anywhere. Why would you go back to the old ways of farming for your food? But I think there's a big difference between work that gets you something that you can survive on and it makes you feel good. And, there's dopamine created just by succeeding physically at doing something like that. That is a lot harder to attain when you're sitting in AC thinking about whether what you're doing is what you want to be doing.
Yeah. Peter calls the fruits of your labor
Right.
simple satisfactions. And this also is no surprise associated with dopaminergic responses, because when you create something that you like, that works, you want to learn that it worked.
Yeah.
And so dopamine, again, is sort of how you learn. And by the way, one of the people who has done a sort of back to the land movement strategy is Peter Sterling.
Right.
He moved to Panama. He bought a farm. Initially, that farm had limited electricity and no access to the internet. It's changed a little bit since then, but the guy gets up in the morning and walks around his farm, collects eggs, checks the coffee plants, interacts with people who are working in adjacent farms, neighbors that are doing, labor. And then he goes home and writes books and articles about neuroscience.
Yeah.
It's the Marxist ideal.
Totally.
As he describes.
Yeah. I think it's very clear to me how a study of allostasis and the fact that our body is trying to take care of us in environments, no matter how terrible those environments are. In some ways, it sounds like we've severely underestimated the kind of impact of long-term stress.
Yeah, many of us. And one of the most interesting things about the interview for me is our brief discussion about scaling.
Yeah.
We have 8 billion people now. When I lived in the Netherlands, on the one hand, there was this way in which it was less convenient because I had to rely on bicycles in the cold rain with my 1-year-old and 3-year-old. On the other hand, every single day, getting to work, getting the kids to preschool and back home was a kind of little adventure.
Right.
It wasn't, an Indiana Jones movie, but it was like, look, a stork.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the level
yeah.
of simple satisfaction that we're shooting for.
Right. Right. This definitely seems like important stuff for people who are interested in social justice and understanding not just the outright obvious ways in which people of different backgrounds or identities are treated differently, but how that kind of has this trickle-down effect on their whole bodies.
Oh, my God. So the thing that you mentioned there that's so important, this is one of the things I love about these interviews with Peter Sterling, the 2 parts. It reveals how important science is and can be for the social justice values that we hold dear. We want to reduce suffering, increase the general frequency of smiles. We want to make people feel more secure. Science is going to help us do that if we're good, probative scientists.
Responsible science, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, next week we have a very special episode of Circle of Willis.
Why do we call our show The Circle of Willis? It's a Halloween special, which is now kind of a tradition because the first Halloween special was about my heart attack. And this one is about Thomas Willis.
It's named after
him. And our show is named after that circle, the Circle of Willis in your brain.
Exactly. So if you want to learn a little bit more about why our show is called Circle of Willis and about Thomas Willis himself, and hear some spooky medical stories from the 1600s,
he revived a dead woman.
Look out for that in 2 weeks.
Folks, the music of Circle of Willis is written and performed by Tom Stauffer and his band, The New Drakes. For more information on how to purchase their music, go to our website, circleofwillispodcast.com.
You can also find all of our old episodes on the website. If you haven't already, subscribe to Circle of Willis wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Twitter and Instagram for more updates.
Circle of Willis, human stories of the science that shapes our world.